The War is Over, the Stonehouse Series, Chapter 44. Bah! 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 Emil turned at the bleating sound of sheep. Janus Jambres, not again! Jesus' eyes followed Emil's gaze. 6 men were attempting to herd a few dozen lambs through the crowd to their holding pens in the court of the Gentiles. Those boys didn't learn a thing. Jesus' hand went to the whip handle tied around his waist. Father, how do you want me to start this? The washing of your temple. In the spirit arena, Uriah shouted to Malbec, "Take point. I've got flank. Jasper, left flank. Phalanx, rear guard." Jasper asked, "Captain, what about our humans, Emil and John?" Uriah called to Peter's guardian, "Ulysses, stay outside and watch over those 2 till we get back." "Sir, yes, sir." As the 4 angels took position around their charge, the crowd parted before him. Through the leading of his Father, in the spirit arena, Jesus positioned himself for the task ahead. Through his Father's eyes, he saw individual spirit creatures and their operations, and those accessing the human arena through a natural thing or person. He watched himself perform a procedure in the natural, which in turn affected both the spirit author and the natural enabler, before he actually said or did the chore. Lifting his gaze to a place above Temple Gateway, Jesus focused on the spot where Herod's Roman eagle had been mounted. Looking like oily feathered black vultures, a cluster of leering demons clung to the temple wall by the way of those ancient splintered anchor holes. In the spirit, Jesus saw himself take off his outer robe and hand it to John. Removing his outer robe, Jesus handed it to John. "Hold this for me and wait out here with Peter and Emil for 10 minutes before you come inside." In the spirit, he saw the nearest demon run for cover as he walked towards the temple door. He saw 4 angels accompanying him and his spirit self broadcasting brilliant light. Jesus stepped towards the temple door. Several people moved out of his way. In the spirit, he saw himself uncoil the whip from around his waist, and it became a lightning bolt in his hand. He removed the whip from his waist, held onto the handle, and let the coils fall to the ground. And in the spirit arena, he saw himself approach the temple gate. One of the vulture-like demons above the door flapped up to escape, and he saw himself draw back with the whip and crack it across the bulkiest part of the vulture's body. Sparks flew in all directions as the demon was blasted from the sky. It fell to the ground in a tangled mass of feathers and flesh. Those standing close to Jesus stepped away as he drew back with his whip and cracked it into the empty sky above them. People from 200 yards away turned to the sound of lightning striking its target. In a blur of motion, Malbec's flashing sword turned the remaining cluster of vulture demons into a discomfited mess. Feet, hands, legs, and torso thudded to the ground and then sizzled up in smoke. In the spirit, Jesus saw himself step over the chunks of feathers at his feet and enter the temple, a path cleared before him. Jesus walked into the temple, and in the spirit he saw just inside the temple and bulking at a table an obese demon sitting with an unjust set of scales. The table was covered with pinkish, pig-like, flabby demons drooling on the gold and silver coins piled up before them. He watched himself throw the table against the closest wall. Demons scattered in all directions as he cut them to shreds with lightning flashing from his hand. Just inside the temple walls sat a money changer at his table, and Jesus took hold of the table corner and threw it up against the wall. Tracking unseen targets, he cracked his whip in several directions. Gold and silver coins bounced across the floor. Falling to the floor and rising furious, the money changer, coming in from behind, lunged at Jesus with a dagger blade. Spinning to his right with his whip hand rising, Jesus' backhand upcut blow caught the money changer beneath his chin and the heel of his fisted whip hand. His second and third strikes were with the last foot of his whip. Uriah's downward stroke slashed the demon's incoming spear point from its main beam shaft, and the chunk of metal tinkled to the cobbles. As Uriah's blade came back up, his second strike cut off the demon's head, and it bounced across the floor while the headless corpse collapsed 20 feet apart. The miscellaneous parts immediately began to bubble up in a stinky smoke. His demon momentarily gone, the scared and bleeding money changer ran from the temple. His assistant, crawling on all fours, was gathering up the scattered money when his robe pocket snagged and inadvertently tripped a lever latch, releasing the pens of lambs. Frightened and caught up in the surrounding frenzy, one lamb burst through the gate, and all of the others followed. The stampeding herd of little woolen creatures made a sweeping arc through the temple, upsetting several vendors' stands and sending people with their trinkets crashing to the cobble floor. Janus and Jambres dashed after their fleeting herd of sheep, shouting as they ran. Petrified, the bleeding lambs scattered in every possible direction. Addressing the intruders in his Father's temple, Jesus roared, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all people, but you have turned it into a den of thieves. Get your vendor stalls and these animals out of here." Janus and Jambres caught 2 lambs each and held them by their back legs, their front feet pawing the ground, trying to get away. The 2 men dragged them back to their pen, their furry little lamb heads bouncing on the cobbles as they slid along. In the spirit, Jesus saw himself persuade the man to release the sheep and leave the temple. Leaning over the sheep fence, the 2 had the lambs by their fur and were about to drop them inside the fence. 2 powerful driven blows convinced the men to release the lambs and run screaming for the door. Now, see who will stitch that up for you. I said out. Take the animals out of here. The temple guards, trained to respond to the higher authority, had been unresponsive up to this point. At Jesus' command, they each picked up the assortment of animals and left the building. Several Passover pilgrims remained to watch as Jesus continued moving through the temple, cracking his whip at tables and walls, and sometimes just snapping it into the air. Sometimes he hit a lingering merchant, making his way for the door. A crowd was gathering outside the temple gate, but they were staying a safe distance from the doors. The watchers were faced with a tremendous contradiction of terms. What they saw first were priests and vendors running from the temple, many were bloodied and limping, and next came guards carrying lambs and doves. What they heard was something totally different. There were screeching and howling from the fighting and dying of creatures mixed with the sound of thunder and lightning in the sky above. The crowd of people covered their ears, protecting themselves from the horrible noise, while they looked around at clear blue sky, searching for the source of the screaming and the smashing and the crashing. They didn't understand. What their eyes saw were people fleeing a building, but what they heard was all of hell breaking loose and being cut down. They kept their distance. After a time, they were all wrapped in silence. Following such tremendous noise, the silence was deafening. No one moved. Finally, 2 men stepped out into the empty space in front of the temple doors. They were the would-be assassins that Jesus had just healed, the same ones who had been sent to kill Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. One of the 2 turned to address the watchers, and he said, "People of Israel, we were dying from the wounds we received as a result of our wickedness. But the God-man, Jesus, he forgave us of our sins. And he healed us of our wounds." There was a moment among the crowd. It was those who were damaged or wounded, sick or blind, and they were making their way to the leading edge of the crowd and the temple gate. The speaker again addressed the people of Israel, who were moving forward. "I believe this same Jesus, who forgave and healed us, he will also heal and forgive you." The 2 men turned and entered the temple. They were immediately followed by people with needs. The dinner bell was ringing, and they refused to be late. Jesus was standing in an almost empty house of prayer. Only a handful of faithful pilgrims had remained inside. They felt somehow safe, as if they had been rescued from an unseen enemy. He wrapped the whip around his waist once more as a belt, but still saw all things through his Father's eyes. The 2 repentant men whom he had healed entered the temple, and close behind them came the hopeful, people who believed their freedom had arrived. They sensed deliverance from gnarled, arthritic hands, paralyzed legs, disease, and demonic torment. They each came praising God that Jesus the healer had come to town. Jesus saw them coming. Yes, this is going to be fun. In the spirit arena, Uriah shouted to his unit, "Ready yourselves, comrades. Here comes the second wave. At all costs, guard the people. Cut them loose from every enemy. Make full use of each opportunity which they and Jesus give you. And if a demon steps across the line, send him straight to hell." Jesus moved into the approaching crowd of people, stripping each one of satanic cargo, sickness, disease, fear, plus every demon's poison plant which had afflicted. To the people who were missing parts or pieces, physically damaged, Jesus restored them all. He passed out arms and legs like a waiter serving guests at a table. To hunched over old women, he asked, "And you, Mum, what will you have?" The old woman answered, "Peaceful movement and perfect posture and pleasant sleep, my Lord." "So be it," answered Jesus, as he gently placed his right hand on her shoulder and directed the life in him to flow into her. The same brightness of life that filled Jesus surged into her, and she received total healing with perfect posture and peaceful movement, and she began to dance around the room. Many of the healed ran out of the temple to find their friends who were sick, broken, or damaged. This was the time of Passover, when the size of the city grew by more than 500,000 people. Pilgrims from all over the nation of Israel and beyond were gathered in Jerusalem for this celebration of deliverance from bondage and for the worship of their God. And now, with the health, healing, and restoration that Jesus was passing out to them, they had a present reason to celebrate. Those people entered the temple by the hundreds, and Jesus healed them all. To a blind boy of 12, Jesus said, "Look at me with both of your eyes." And the boy looked up to Jesus. To the woman who had only one leg, he said, "Stand upright on your own 2 feet." And she stood up and went skipping around the courtyard. So went the entire morning and early afternoon. All those receptive to his healing touch or words of life were healed and restored to life. In between the waves of life and godliness in motion towards the receptive and the flow of people into the temple, Jesus would switch to teaching them or telling them stories. And when more sick or damaged people would come forward, he healed them all. And when Pharisees or chief priests would try to stop him or try to stop the people from receiving, Jesus simply confronted their twisted hearts, telling a story all the people understood, firmly placing a cork in the mouth of the wicked. This was the day, a grand finale, and he was finishing his race in absolute victory. From the center of the soul, Jesus delivered from the garden of God, and there was plenty to go around.